because they will lead to more jobs.
Question number 2, the Leader of the Opposition, David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does he stand by his statement given in answer to oral question number 2 on the 1st of May 2012, quote, "My Chief of Staff spoke with the Honourable John Banks and sought an assurance from him that he had fully complied with the requirements of the Local Electoral Act in respect of donations. Mr Banks gave his assurance during the phone call and stated that he was not aware that Mr .com had made the donation to his mayoral campaign."
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Does he stand by a statement that a minister to enjoy his confidence, quote, the test is, has he misled me?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Is he aware of the sworn statement from Gregory Towers, a partner at Simpson Grierson, who said Mr Banks told him in February this year, when he was a Cabinet Minister, that he could not assist Mr .com in getting medical attention in prison because that may backfire on Kim if it became known about the election support?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I haven't read the report, but I've seen media reports. What I'm aware is that's a statement from Mr Towers, not a statement from Mr Banks.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Is he aware of the dinner Mr Banks had with Kim.com, where Kim.com offered him $50,000, to which he replied, no, not one cheque, write 2 cheques out for $25,000 each, as cited in the sworn statement of Kim.com's security guard?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, I'm not aware of the specific dinner the member's talking about, although I am aware that Mr Banks had dinner with Mr .com. I'm also aware that under the rules of the existing legislation, it's quite within the rules to solicit cheques and donations on such a basis and comply with the law.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Can he assure the House that changes to the new Local Electoral Act that he's proposing will address the issues raised in the police files on John Banks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, I haven't read the report, but I can say that this government will tidy up that legislation where that government failed. And, Mr Speaker, a couple of years ago, the Labour Party weren't worried about this issue.
Order. Point of order.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. That was a pretty straight question.
The order. I think the question was answered, but I think the territory the Prime Minister was about to go into then was probably beyond the question asked. Does the member have a further supplementary question? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much. How can he be 100% sure that the new amendments will address those issues when he actually hasn't read the police files on John Banks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm certainly well and truly aware of the failings of electoral law, and funnily enough, so is the Labour Party, because if I was to quote from Prime Minister Helen Clark, she said through a spokeswoman the electoral law was, quote, confusing, contradictory and needed to be reviewed. Guess what? Helen Clark and I worked it out. Shame is Helen Clark did nothing about it.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Why does the Prime Minister refuse to read the police files on John Banks?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, because it's not my practice to go and read police files. This will come as a great shock to the member, but the police are independent in New Zealand. They do their own investigations. And guess what? This isn't the bit. This is the bit that the Labour Party aren't quoting. Guess what? The police said there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. By the way, no case.
The Leader of the Opposition.
How can he continue to claim that John Banks didn't mislead him, given that Mr Banks claimed that he, one, wasn't aware of the donations from Kim.com in spite of the fact that he solicited the donation at a dinner at .com's house, asked that the donation be split in half so he could claim it was anonymous, thanked Mr .com for the donations during a phone call, and as recently as the 8th of February this year, declined to assist Mr .com on the basis he had donated to Mr Banks' campaign?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm confident of 2 things. Firstly, that my Chief of Staff spoke to Mr Banks' office and sought an assurance that he had fully complied with the local requirements of the Local Electoral Act, and 2, that he was not aware that Mr .com had made donations. Many of the things that the member is now claiming are within the law. And by the way, Mr Speaker, there are many older members of this Parliament who would have complied to the old law.
I think there's been sufficient answer. This is a supplementary question, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, can the Prime Minister remember saying this is not a Prime Minister in control, it is a Prime Minister in damage control. She should now act over Mr Field. Why are we waiting, Prime Minister? Helen Clark is only interested in protecting her slim majority in Parliament. And what's changed other than the Prime Minister?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
A couple of things, Mr Speaker. One, yes, I remember making that statement. And secondly, I'm not surprised Trevor Mallard's on his feet because, quite frankly, David Shearer is going about as well today as he did on Q&A on Sunday.
Supplementary question.
Now, look, order. Just I ask the House to settle down a moment. This is not going to get easy if it gets too testy. The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Is the Prime Minister still satisfied and will rely on the police conclusion when the evidence now shows that John Banks lied to his Chief of Staff and or the media on this matter, and if so, why?
The Right Honourable
Speaker,
Prime Minister.
the matter does not show that Mr Banks lied to my Chief of Staff. Quite the contrary. Mr Banks complied with the law. See, the Labour Party care about the law today, but they didn't care about it enough to change it. If you cared so much a while ago, change the law back then.
Question number 3, Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.